Today, we delve into a crisis that threatens to disrupt North America's energy security. For decades, Canada has been the United States' primary oil supplier, providing over 60% of America's crude oil imports. However, escalating trade tensions and political discord have pushed Canada to consider a drastic move, a potential complete shutdown of oil exports to the U.S. We will break down the events, examine the economic and geopolitical consequences, and explore the profound impact on everyday life. How will this potential shutdown affect you, your family, and your community? Chapter 1: The oil partnership that built an economy for decades. The relationship between Canada and the United States has been the cornerstone of North American energy security. Canada's oil sands have supplied a steady flow of heavy crude essential for U.S. refineries designed specifically for this grade, enabling the United States to maintain competitive fuel prices and a stable economic environment. By consistently delivering roughly 3.8 to 4 million barrels per day, Canadian heavy crude has not only kept the price of gasoline relatively low, but also provided a secure foundation for industries that depend on transportation and logistics. According to the U.S. Energy Information Administration (EIA), in the early 2010s, average gas prices hovered around $2.50 to $3.0 per gallon, prices that many American families could comfortably afford. Consider the everyday American driver. For years, the dependable supply of Canadian oil has meant predictable fuel costs, allowing families to budget for monthly commuting expenses, road trips, and even the cost of transporting goods from local supermarkets. A study by the EIA noted that nearly 70% of U.S. refineries are optimized for processing Canadian heavy crude. This specialization has helped keep fuel prices stable and ensured that the cost of doing business for industries like trucking, agriculture, and retail remains manageable. Without this steady supply, fluctuations in fuel prices could send shockwaves through every sector of the economy. This enduring energy partnership has been a major driver of prosperity on both sides of the border. Yet, today, that foundation is under serious threat. Chapter 2: The U.S. Tariff Decision, a catalyst for change. In a dramatic shift in trade policy, the U.S. government recently imposed tariffs on a wide range of Canadian exports. Under the new rules, key products including a 10% tariff on Canadian crude oil and higher tariffs on other strategic goods are suddenly more expensive. Ostensibly designed to protect domestic industries and reduce trade deficits, these tariffs are introducing a profound level of uncertainty into the energy market. The 10% tariff on Canadian oil, while seemingly modest, has significant implications when you consider that over 55% of U.S. crude imports come from Canada. Moreover, higher tariffs on other goods force U.S. businesses to re-examine long-standing supply chains that have thrived under tariff-free conditions. For consumers, the immediate effect of these tariffs is already being felt. Analysts project that even a 10% tariff on oil could increase gasoline prices by 15 to 20 cents per gallon. For a family driving 1,000 miles per month, that might translate to an extra $40 or more in fuel costs every month. But it doesn't stop there. Tariffs on automobile parts, electronics, and even household appliances could lead to an across-the-board rise in prices. According to recent surveys, nearly 45% of U.S. households are worried that these trade tensions will drive up the cost of living, reducing their disposable income and altering spending habits. While the U.S. administration claims these tariffs are a temporary bargaining chip, the effects are already penetrating the economy and your wallet. Chapter 3: Canada's Reaction, the threat of an oil cutoff in response to the U.S. tariff imposition. Canadian leadership has issued a stern warning. Faced with the prospect of diminished profitability, Canada is now considering drastic measures, including the possibility of halting oil exports to the United States entirely. This is not just a rhetorical threat. Canada has the infrastructure and the alternative markets to redirect its oil exports to Asia or Europe. Imagine for a moment that Canadian oil is no longer available to U.S. refineries. According to industry estimates, gasoline prices could jump to as high as $3 to $5 per gallon in some regions. For an average American family, this means a dramatic increase in monthly transportation costs, potentially disrupting daily commutes, weekend trips, and even the delivery of essential goods like groceries. The ripple effect would extend further, affecting public transportation fares, airline ticket prices, and even the cost of heating and electricity in colder regions. In fact, a report by the American Automobile Association, Trade 20A, indicates that such a cutoff could push transportation costs up by 15-20 cents, a significant burden for households already facing tight budgets. Chapter 4. Consequences for the U.S. Economy, rising gas prices, and inflation. The implications of these tariff-induced disruptions extend far beyond the oil market. U.S. Economists warn that losing access to Canadian oil could accelerate inflation across the economy, affecting everything from gasoline prices to the cost of consumer goods. With the energy sector being a major input into almost every other industry, the impact could be widespread. If Canadian oil supplies are disrupted, U.S. gasoline prices could see a significant jump. For example, if prices rise by 20 cents per gallon, a family with a monthly fuel consumption of 100 gallons could see an extra $20 charge every month. But when you factor in the knock-on effects across other sectors such as higher transportation costs, leading to increased grocery prices, and the increased cost of manufacturing that raises the prices of consumer goods, the cumulative impact on inflation could be dramatic. Consider the average American household. Increased fuel costs mean not only higher monthly gas bills, but also elevated prices on goods that depend on transportation, such as fresh produce and retail items. Chapter 5. U.S. Energy infrastructure limitations. Many have suggested that the U.S. could simply ramp up domestic oil production to replace the loss of Canadian imports. However, the reality is far more complex. U.S. oil production primarily consists of lighter, sweet crude, while American refineries are finely tuned over decades to process the heavier Canadian crude. This mismatch poses significant challenges. Retooling refineries to process different grades of crude oil is not a matter of flipping a switch. It requires substantial capital investment, regulatory approvals, and a transition period that could last years. For everyday consumers, this means that even if U.S. production increases, it won't immediately offset the loss of Canadian heavy crude. Imagine that the reconfiguration of refineries takes 2 to 3 years, a period during which fuel shortages and high prices could persist. This extended period of adjustment could lead to a prolonged phase of uncertainty at the gas pump and higher prices for everything from delivery services to consumer goods. Research indicates that during such transitional periods, gasoline prices could remain 15-20 cents higher than usual, forcing families to relocate their budgets and potentially cut back on other essential expenditures. Chapter 6. The shrinking U.S. Strategic Petroleum Reserve. Another factor exacerbating this precarious situation is the state of the U.S. Strategic Petroleum Reserve, SPR. Established as a safeguard during previous energy crises, the SPR once held as much as 727 million barrels of oil. Today, however, it has dwindled to roughly 390 million barrels, its lowest level in over 40 years. This dramatic reduction in the reserve means that in the event of a major supply disruption, such as a complete cutoff of Canadian oil, the U.S. would have a much smaller cushion to absorb the shock. The SPR's decline is a stark warning that America's energy safety net is weakening precisely when it is needed most. For everyday citizens, a reduced SPR is not just a statistic, it's a potential cause for concern. During winter months or times of geopolitical turmoil, the SPR has traditionally acted as a buffer to prevent sudden fuel shortages and price spikes. With the reserve nearly halved, consumers could experience longer wait times at gas stations, higher prices for heating oil, and even disruptions in electricity supply in regions that depend on petroleum-based energy generation. This scenario translates directly into higher household expenses and greater uncertainty about energy security. Chapter 7. Global Ripple Effects. Shifting alliances and market dynamics. While the immediate focus remains on North American energy and trade, the consequences of these policy shifts ripple through global markets. Oil is a truly international commodity, and any disruption in the North American supply chain has the potential to influence prices and trade patterns worldwide. If Canada redirects its oil exports to alternative markets in Asia or Europe, the global balance of supply could shift dramatically. For instance, a 2 million barrels per day MBD reduction in global oil supply could cause Brent oil prices to peak at $92 per barrel. In practical terms, this means that households across Europe, Asia, and even emerging markets could see their energy bills rise by 5–10%, further squeezing budgets and stifling economic growth. Globally, higher oil prices affect everyone. In Europe, where many households already struggle with high energy costs, even a modest 5% increase in fuel prices can translate into hundreds of extra euros per year in heating and transportation costs. In developing countries, where energy expenses make up a larger share of household income, the impact can be even more severe, leading to decreased disposable income, reduced access to essential services, and slower overall economic growth. Furthermore, higher energy prices tend to feed into the cost of goods, meaning that everyday items like food, clothing, and household appliances will become more expensive. Chapter 8: Political Fallout and Future Prospects. With an election year looming in the United States, the trade war has rapidly become a contentious political issue. Lawmakers are now divided on how best to respond, whether to roll back tariffs in exchange for concessions or to stand firm, even at the risk of triggering a full-scale trade war that could hurt both economies. Political uncertainty doesn't just affect stock markets and trade figures. It hits home for ordinary people. Prolonged uncertainty and contentious debates can dampen consumer confidence and stall investment, which in turn reduces economic activity. Recent surveys by the National Retail Federation estimated that American consumers could lose between $46 billion and $78 billion in spending power each year if certain tariffs are implemented. For everyday families, this means fewer outings, reduced discretionary spending, and potentially even job losses in vulnerable sectors. For instance, a study by the U.S., China Business Council, and Oxford Economics estimated that the United States lost 245,000 jobs as a result of the 2018-2019 trade war. The impact on household budgets could be profound. Lower consumer confidence means less spending at restaurants, fewer vacations, and a more cautious approach to major purchases like cars and homes. In turn, businesses facing uncertain demand may delay hiring or cut back on expansion plans, creating a vicious cycle of economic slowdown. As we have seen today, the potential cutoff of Canadian oil exports and the unfolding trade war over tariffs is much more than an abstract economic maneuver. It represents a strategic pivot that could redefine energy security and reshape the daily lives of millions of people. How do you see these changes impacting your daily life? And what measures do you think policymakers should take to safeguard both economies?